One of these foldables is the one that makes you smile the second you pick it up. The other one, I think more people should probably buy. And weirdly, those aren't the same phone, because the Honor Magic V6 feels like the foldable that wants to wow you straight away. It's unbelievably thin. The battery story is wild, and the whole thing feels like Honor set out to make a real statement. Then the Oppo Find N6 comes in from a different angle. This one feels more about refinement, better cameras potentially, better polish, less crease distraction, and less friction day to day. So the real question here is not which one looks better on paper, it's which one actually wins once you stop reading spec sheets and start using them like a normal person. And after using both of these, I think one of them is more exciting, but the other one is more convincing. And the camera section especially ended up mattering more than I expected. By the end of this video, you'll know which one wins for design, screens, battery, cameras, software, and actual daily use, which matters more in my opinion. I'll score them properly. I'll give you the hardware winner, and I'll give you the overall winner. And I'll also tell you which one I'd personally pick, because again, those are not exactly the same answer. Grab a snack, strap yourself in. This might be the video you've been waiting for. Let's get into it. This is the Chinese version of the Honor Magic V6 against the global version of the Oppo Find N6. But I don't want this whole video to turn into a Chinese ROM versus global ROM drama, because honestly, that's not really the heart of the comparison. The bigger story is that these phones feel like they were built with different priorities. The Honor feels like the one that wants to shock you. The Oppo feels like the one that wants to settle in and quietly prove it's a more complete package. And that's what makes this interesting. So let's start with the bit foldables either nail immediately or get wrong before you've even unlocked them. Let's start with the design, because this is the first place Honor really lands a punch. The Magic V6 is the kind of phone that makes people do a double take. You hand it to someone and they usually say some version of the same thing. Wait, this is the foldable. Because fold is shut, it feels much closer to a normal premium phone than most book style foldables do. It's thin, it's light, it doesn't feel awkward in the pocket, and it just feels like less of a commitment. It feels like Honor looked at the foldable category and said, right, let's stop making people feel like they're carrying a passport wallet. Now, the Oppo Find N6 is also very impressive. And that's important. This isn't some chunky compromised brick. It still feels premium, thin, well balanced, and a lot more normal in the hand than other foldables. Now personally, if I'm judging this category on first impressions and in-hand wow factor, I think that Honor takes it. There isn't much in it, but for the design and in-hand feel, the first point goes to Honor Magic V6. Just about. Now this matters a lot more than people admit, because yes, there are foldables, but most of the time you're still using them closed. You're checking WhatsApp, opening the camera quickly, reading an email, changing a song, using maps, that sort of thing, you get the idea. And this is where Honor does very well again, because when it's closed, it just feels easier to forget you're using a foldable. The thinness helps, the weight helps, and for me, the width helps. Because it's slightly wider than the Oppo Find N6, I find it way easier to type. The Oppo cover screen is still very good though. It feels a bit more cramped than the Honor Magic V6. Not weird, it still behaves like a proper flagship outer screen should. And I think the Honor gives you a little bit more of that normal phone experience when shut. And that matters if this is meant to be your main device. So again, slight edge to the Honor. Not a demolition by any means, just a small but real edge. Now this is where Oppo starts waking up, finally, right? Because foldables get away with a lot, but the crease is still the bit that reminds people this isn't normal glass, and the Find N6 does a really good job here. When you open it up, the inner display just feels flatter, more settled. The crease is less distracting, less in your face, and less something you keep noticing every time the light catches it. That matters because on a foldable, the goal was not just to give me a bigger screen. The goal is to make me forget the engineering in the middle of it. The Honor inner display is still very good. It looks premium, it gets bright, very bright. It feels high-end and it absolutely belongs in this price class. But the Oppo feels more mature here. Like it has spent a bit more time ironing out one of the category's most annoying little reminders. And if I'm judging this as a foldable display, not just as a display, then I think Oppo takes this one. So for the inner display and crease, point goes to Find N6. Now in terms of raw speed, both of these are absolutely rapid. Apps open quickly, scrolling is smooth, multitasking is strong, and neither of these feel underpowered at all. So this category is not really about power, because honestly, for most people, both of these phones are going to feel fast enough that you're never really going to sit there complaining. For me though, this comes down to something a bit smaller, but also a bit more important. Which one feels more polished? Which one feels more fluid? Which one feels easier to use? Which one feels like the software is a little bit more thought through? And for me, that's ColorOS, specifically ColorOS 16 on the Oppo Find N6. Using these two phones as they are, I just think that ColorOS feels more polished. The animations feel a bit nicer. The fluidity feels a bit more refined. The general ease of use feels a bit better. And it's the small things, really small things that makes the difference. For example, with ColorOS 16, you still get the option to keep the notification shade the way Android has always done it, which I personally prefer. But if you want that split setup more like Apple with a separate control center, you can have that too. And for me, that flexibility is huge because it means Oppo gives you the choice instead of forcing one idea on you. Then there's multitasking. On the Find N6, you want to open 3 apps side by side. It just feels a bit more seamless. The option appears lower down and feels easier to trigger naturally. On the V6, you can still do it, but you have to drag the app towards the top left. It feels a bit less intuitive. It's one of those things that's hard to explain until you actually use both. But the Oppo feels like it just gets you there with less effort. And that's kind of the story with ColorOS versus MagicOS for me. There is not some massive day and night gap. It's not like one is amazing, the other one is terrible. MagicOS 10 is actually really good, but ColorOS 16 as a complete package just feels a bit more refined, a bit more customizable, and a bit more polished in the little everyday interactions. So for pure performance, honestly, call it a draw. But for overall smoothness, polish, and software feel, I'd give the edge to Oppo Find N6. Right, this is where the Honor goes from impressive to slightly disrespectful. Let me explain. Because one of the reasons the Magic V6 is such a talking point is that it doesn't just try to be thin, it also tries to kill battery anxiety at the same time. And normally with foldables, that's the compromise. You get the cool form factor, but battery ends up being decent considering. The Honor is trying to skip the word considering altogether. And in real life, that changes how you use it. You stop doing mental maths halfway through the day. You stop thinking, I probably shouldn't open the big screen too much because I might need this later. I definitely do that a lot. The Oppo battery is still strong, don't get me wrong. And I want to be fair here. This is not a weak battery at all. For most people, it will be good enough and then some. But the Honor feels like the more outrageous battery package. And once you combine that with fast charging, it just feels like the more stress-free power setup. So battery and charging goes to the Honor Magic V6. And at this point, the score gets interesting because the Honor is winning on hardware feel and battery confidence. The Oppo is winning on foldable refinement and day-to-day polish. But the bit that really tipped this comparison for me was the cameras, because that's where this stopped being theoretical and got properly personal. Now this is the bit where I need to be really honest. I'm not looking at these cameras like some professional photographer who's going to start throwing around words that make it sound like I own 4 lenses and a scarf. Wait, do photographers wear scarves? It doesn't matter. This is not me. I'm looking at these like someone who uses phone cameras the way most people do. See something nice, take the phone out, take the shot, look back at it later and ask one simple question. Does that feel like what I actually saw? Because for me, that's what a photograph is supposed to do. For me, it's supposed to capture a moment in time, something you look back on later and remember properly. The light, the mood, the shadows, the feeling of being there, not just the prettiest version of it. And this is where I started noticing that these two phones have very different ideas about what a good photo should be. The first thing I noticed was that the Oppo Find N6 just seems to take pictures quicker than the Honor Magic V6. And I don't think that's because one of them has a better chip in general, because they're both playing in the same top-end Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 chip territory. This feels more like tuning, capture speed, shutter response, processing timing, whatever is going on behind the scenes. The point is, the N6 feels snappier, and that matters more than people think, because when you're shooting kids, pets, animals, anything moving, speed is confidence. You press the button and you feel like the phone actually grabbed the moment. The Honor doesn't feel bad here, don't get me wrong, but side by side, the Oppo feels quicker to get the shot. And once I noticed that, I couldn't unsee it. In daylight, both of these are very good, very, very good. They're both properly good cameras for foldables. Loads of details, strong dynamic range, good sharpness, good enough that if you only use one of them on its own, you'd probably be perfectly happy. But side by side, I kept leaning towards the N6. The reason is color science. I just prefer the way the N6 sees the world. To my eyes, it feels more true to life. There's a richness there, but it doesn't feel like it's trying too hard. What I kept doing was taking the photo, looking back at the scene with my own eyes, and looking at both shots and asking which one actually feels closer to what I just saw. And more often than not, it was the Oppo Find N6. The Honor often brightens things a bit more. It lifts the image, opens things up a bit more, and makes the shot look a bit more immediately impressive. And to be fair, some people are going to prefer that straight away. But for me, it can start drifting away from the actual moment. It starts feeling less like a memory and more like an interpretation, if that makes sense. Now moving on to telephoto shots in daylight, especially animals and more distant subjects, I found the same basic pattern. Both are good. Good detail, useful zoom, the kind of telephoto cameras that actually feel worth using. But again, I preferred the Oppo Find N6. The Oppo seems to hold on to the shadows better. It keeps a bit more depth in the image. It feels less eager to flatten everything out into a nice, safe, bright shot. The V6 sometimes lightens the photo more than I want. And again, that's not always bad. Some people will see that and think, yeah, that looks better. And honestly, I get it. But for my taste, I prefer the Oppo showing a bit more of the real contrast in the scene. It just feels a bit more natural to me. And when you're looking at animals, especially fur, shape, depth, little changes in the shadow actually matter quite a lot. So the telephoto in daylight still leans Oppo for me. Now, I also did a 4K 60 video comparison in daylight because photos are one thing, but video is where you really start to see how these phones handle the world in motion. Both give you sharp footage, both have nice detail, and both look properly flagship for foldables. So again, this is not one of those situations where one looks amazing and the other one looks cheap. But when I looked at the footage back side by side, I still find myself leaning towards the Oppo Find N6. And it comes back to the same thing noticed in the photos. The N6 just feels a bit more true to life. The colors look richer without feeling overdone, and the overall scene feels a bit more like what I was seeing with my own eyes. The V6 here, again, sometimes feels like it brightens things a bit too much and lifts the image a bit more than I personally want. Now, to be fair, that does mean sometimes you get a clip that looks a bit more instantly eye-catching straight away. Some people are going to prefer that, but for me, I still prefer the N6 here because it feels more natural. And I think when you're filming memories, days out, family stuff, random moments you want to look back on later, natural usually wins. So in daylight 4K 60 video, I'd give the edge to the Oppo Find N6. Then I did the jog test because this is where always phones stop looking impressive on a spec sheet and start showing you what they're actually made of. Because it's easy to look stable when you're standing still. It's a very different story when you're properly moving, especially if you're walking quickly or having a little jog with the camera rolling. And in my testing, both phones did a decent job, but one of them definitely gave me more confidence. Have a look and let me know what you think. And just remember, I don't go to the gym very often, so I did get tired even going downhill. You've all heard of running up the hill. Oh, this is me running down the hill. Which one's more stable? On the right is the Oppo N6. On the left is the Honor Magic V6. I'm trying to hold both as still as possible. The Honor Magic V6 was not bad by any means. It still did a respectable job. If you were just casually walking around, most people probably wouldn't complain. But once I pushed it a bit more with my jog test, I think the N6 just held things a bit better. It looked a bit more smoother. It looked a bit more composed. The Oppo Find N6 looked more controlled overall. It handled the movement a bit better. The footage felt a bit more settled, and I noticed less of that slight bounce and shake that you can sometimes creep in and remind you that yes, you're holding a phone while jogging. And again, it just gave me a bit more trust that if I pulled the phone out and started filming while moving, I get the better result more often on the Oppo N6. So for stabilization in daylight, especially on the jog test, I'd give that one to the Oppo Find N6 as well. Just remember, there isn't much in these, by the way. It's just my opinions. This one was the hardest tests. Low light, moving fish, zoomed in. This is basically a stress test for any phone camera. And to be fair, both of them sometimes messed it up. On the Honor Magic V6 at about 5x and on the Oppo Find N6 at about 6x, both phones could give you blurry shots or moving fish when things were tricky. That's not shocking, that's a hard shot. But more often than not, the N6 gave me a slightly clearer keeper. Not every single time, mind you, but often enough that I noticed it. And I think that comes back to the quicker capture feeling. When the subject is moving and the phone reacts a touch faster, that little difference can be the whole shot. So if you often photograph moving subjects, especially in awkward conditions, I trust the Oppo a bit more. Night photography made my preferences even clearer. The Honor definitely tries to help you more in low light. It lifts shadows, brightens the image, and sometimes shows you detail in the darker areas that the Oppo just leaves behind and is more subdued. Now again, there will be people who look at that and prefer it. That brighter, more processed, more obviously enhanced style can look very impressive, and it does. But for me, sometimes the V6 brightened things a bit too much. It started to feel less like night and more like the phone is trying to rescue the whole scene. I don't really want the phone turning it into a well-lit retail park. And that's why I kept coming back to the N6. It still processes the image, of course, but it feels more restrained, more believable, and more like it's helping rather than rewriting. So in low light stills, if you like brighter, more obviously processed night shots, you prefer the Honor Magic V6. But if you like something that feels a bit more true to life, and I kept doing the whole, which one looks better, which one looks better. But if you like something that feels more true to life, I think the Oppo Find N6 wins. Exactly the same thing happened with low light video at 4K 60. The Honor brightens the scene more. You see more detail. Things look a bit more lifted, a bit more vibrant. And again, I'm not saying it looks bad. It doesn't. But when I compare it to what I can actually see in real life, the Oppo, for me, feels more believable. The N6 doesn't look dull. It looks truer. It keeps more of the actual atmosphere of the scene instead of trying to turn it into something more brighter, more digestible version of itself. So for low light video as well, I'd give the edge to the Oppo. This is feeling really one-sided, right? So this whole camera section really comes down to philosophy. The Honor often feels like it wants to help more. The Oppo feels like it wants to preserve more. And for me, personally, if you're talking about the whole full camera experience, not just photos, but photos and videos, the winner is still the Oppo Find N6, because when I look back at a photo or a clip later, I want it to remind me of what I actually saw, not what the phone thought would make the better thumbnail or picture. Now, obviously this is subjective. Photos are subjective. Color is subjective. Everyone sees the world differently, and some of you will absolutely look at these exact same shots and pick the Honor every single time. That's fair. Also, both phones give you room to take more control if you want to jump into pro modes and start tweaking things. But point and shoot, straight out of the camera, no excuses. The phone I preferred more often was the Oppo Find N6. Not because the Honor is weak, it isn't by any means, but because the N6 feels quicker, it's more reliable with movement, and more true to life in the way it processes the scene. So cameras goes to Oppo Find N6. Last category, durability. And this is another place where the Honor deserves credit, because when a foldable is this thin, people naturally start worrying. Is it durable? Does it feel fragile? Am I going to have to baby this thing every day? And the Honor does a really good job of not feeling flimsy at all. And that matters because foldables still have that psychological hurdle for people. The Oppo still feels premium, it's well built, but the Honor feels a bit more aggressive in reassuring you, because the Magic V6 is the first foldable that comes with IP68 and IP69 rating. And if you saw my initial impressions video, that means it's completely resistant to dust and sand. And that matters when you're going to the beach, although this is protected, but it's not as tight as this one. So in terms of this last category, in terms of durability, they both feel premium, they both feel very durable, but the Honor Magic V6 takes this one, just. So let's score this properly. Design in hand feel goes to Honor. Cover display, normal fold feel goes to Honor. Inner display and crease goes to Oppo. Software and ease of use goes to Oppo. Productivity and multitasking goes to Oppo. Battery and charging goes to Honor. Cameras go to Oppo. Durability and peace of mind goes to Honor. If you count that up, the Oppo edges the comparison overall, only just. But the Honor is still one that made me smile even when I picked it up. And that's why this verdict needs two answers. If we're talking about the more outrageous bit of hardware, the more impressive engineering flex, the phone that makes the biggest first impression, it's the Honor Magic V6, no doubt. This phone is wild. It's one of the things that makes you feel like foldables have finally stopped feeling compromised tech demos. It feels like a proper leap, and the brighter screen in the sunlight definitely makes a difference. But if we're talking about the foldable I recommend to more people, the foldable that feels more complete, more polished, easier to trust, easier to live with, and more convincing as an actual main phone, then I'm gonna have to give it to the Oppo Find N6, because once the wow factor settles down, you start caring about different things. How natural does the camera look? How flat is the inner display feel? How polished is the software? How easy is the phone to live with every single day? And that is where the Oppo keeps winning ever so slightly. So my verdict is simple. The Honor Magic V6 is the hardware flex. The Oppo Find N6 is the smarter all-round buy. The Honor impresses me more. Trust me, it does, in a lot of the ways. The Oppo convinces me more. And there is a difference. If you want the foldable that feels like a mad bit of engineering, go Honor. If you want the foldable I'd feel more comfortable recommending to most people with my actual name attached to it, MazTechCentral, I'd go Oppo. That brings me to the very end of this video. This video is a long video and I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it, because I love making these videos and I keep saying it to you guys, but I genuinely do. And if you reached this far, thank you so much for watching the whole video. Make sure you like this video and subscribe because it definitely helps the channel. I'm Maz and this is MazTechCentral, where I like to keep tech simple and accessible for everyone. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Make sure you take care of each other. See you later.